Hi, my name is Brandi Lai. I am a trans and LGBTQ plus entrepreneur.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. So today we get to talk with Brandi Lai, who is joining us from my home state of Florida. So Brandi, welcome to the show. It's awesome having you here.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to learn more about you and your business and to share everything that you're doing with our audience. And for folks that might not be familiar, Brandi is the founder and owner of Best Laid Pens, a content strategy, ghostwriting, developmental editing, and consulting company. So Best Laid Pens amplifies the stories of underrepresented and marginalized people who may not have the opportunity to share their thoughts, ideas, and lived experiences. As an out transgender woman, Brandi knows the value of having your story told the way you would tell it to a friend. She founded this company to create change and ensure that LGBTQ people, and in particular transgender and non-binary people, have the opportunity and platform to speak their truth. Brandi, I love what you're doing. This is going to be fun. So why don't you tell us your journey and getting started? And I love the name of your company, Best Laid Pens. So how did it happen? Give us the highlights of the story.
Honestly, it came out of nowhere. To put it like that's the simple answer. Because one thing I've noticed in working and telling a lot of different entrepreneur stories is that they never really had an idea when they were like 5 or 6 to come up with this, business model. It sort of came out of a series of events where they were either told, hey, we want you to speak at this company or this event, and then it sort of goes from there. And that's sort of how mine came about. I was working with a client who wanted to have a ghostwriter. She was looking to have her book published by the end of last year in 2020. So we had already worked together on another story, and she requested me, and we worked it out. And through the process, she empowered me to start my own business. She very much helps out other LGBTQ plus people. And I'm pretty sure I could say her name, Ashley Brundage. If anybody's familiar with her, she's a fantastic person. Her book, Empowering Differences, has just come out, and I'm honored to have worked on it and to have helped her bring it to life. And one of the biggest things that she told me to do was to start my own business. She showed me the ropes. She showed me everything. I didn't know how to do any of this, but she led the way. And I was like, yeah, this is probably something that I want to continue doing. And I want to help continuing other people's stories. So I'm 100% on board. I just need to get all the logistics figured out. And yeah, here I am.
So one, Ashley's awesome. She's a friend of the show. A couple episodes ago, we were talking about the book that you worked on, which was really, a really powerful interview. And so I'm curious, what were the words that she said to you that clicked in for you of like, oh, wait, this is a business, this is real, and I can do this. What was kind of the magic where you really, she gave you that dose of confidence to just take that first step?
I honestly think the first dose was knowing her story and knowing where she comes from and how she got her business started. And it inspired me to think about it more critically. And the seeds were planted by learning her story. And then when she brought up the idea and she was like, you should start it. You could have something here. I don't remember the specific words, unfortunately, but her telling me, you should start a business. This is something that you can grow and develop, and this will help you professionally. And if this is something you want to continue doing.
Yeah.
And, it was an experiment at first, and it's grown and it's growing, and I couldn't be happier with where I am right now.
Yes. Yeah. So it was almost maybe not a set of words that you needed to hear, but the feeling of, having another person see you as a professional business owner that you are, maybe kind of before you saw it for yourself, and that just kind of feeling that sense of belief and then believing in yourself to do it is huge, right? And that's one thing that we know, through the audience here, is just like that belief in the idea, and if someone else believes in it before you do, that's great. But as soon as you do, that's when you're kind of off to the races. And so talk to me a little bit about developing content for your clients. Like, what's the best part of doing that? Why do you like doing it? And what do you get out of it?
I would say hearing people's stories, because especially with other LGBTQ plus people, which is the group that like I feel like I want to focus on, just coming from like a personal perspective of wanting to help other LGBTQ plus people and other trans people help tell their stories, but getting to know their stories, getting to know where they come from. And it's almost like I'm let into their world and I'm let in to see what they see, like some of the most intimate moments, some of the most moments of glory and triumph. And like, they did it and they made it, and just being there with them. And it's inspiring to hear it and to help tell their stories and to go along with the journey with them throughout their recounting of what happened, and also throughout their journey of becoming an author and becoming a published author. It's a book or an article or a blog post, whatever it may be, helping them get to that end point, helping them see them, and especially seeing them at the end point, seeing them at the end goal and seeing everything pay off, all the hours of work and the like everything that goes into it, and just seeing the end goal and finally realizing everything. It's a huge moment of gratification.
Yes. How do you get the authors that you work with? And I imagine you're doing content editing in other respects as well, but mostly in kind of that publishing space. How do you get them to excavate those stories, to go back to maybe some of the harder stories that are really impactful when we can share them? And in particular, working with LGBT communities, I imagine, the coming out process and, bringing, loved ones and people in your life along that journey, some of whom come with you and others don't. So I imagine that brings up a lot of emotional, pain, but also, you want to process that to share those stories. So what's your process like for getting people out of their shells to recognize the power in their stories?
A lot of it is digging deeper. I'm trying to think of a better word of than prodding questions, but basically trying to asking those critical questions that people may not open up on. Like, if X thing happened, being like, well, how did X thing happen? What happened? What time? What was it like? What did it feel like? And making sure that they feel comfortable. If they don't feel comfortable, they don't have to mention that. However powerful, however impactful it might be for a reader, if the author isn't comfortable with it, then that's the end. I can only push so far. I am here to help them, and I'm letting them take the wheel on however they want their story to be told. So I think it's a lot of trust. It's definitely a lot of trust, and it's a lot of vulnerability. And I open up about my own story, what I've been through on my own end, to help deepen that level of trust, because it does help a lot when you know that the other person has been through something similar, or has similar experiences, or knows someone who has gone through it. It's a lot easier to trust somebody versus somebody who is just no emotional recognition of what the person's gone through. And it's just all right, just keep talking. No, I don't, I don't do that. I make sure that there is trust and there is emotional trust between me and whoever I'm working with.
Yeah. I love that you said trust. I was writing down safety, thinking you're really trying to create, a space that is safer, right? There's no guarantee that any space is safe, but you're trying to create that container for, the folks that you're serving. And it's kind of twofold. It's one, it's those lived experiences where the stories and the content comes from, but then it's also this piece of, the writing process itself, and how that in and of itself requires just safety and trust to kind of, say, all right, I'm going to put the story out in the world. I have no idea. I have no control once it's out there, who will read it or how they react to it. So, in a lot of ways, it almost feels like you're playing a therapist, like a writing therapist, you know?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And something that like I've worked for also for Publish Your Purpose Press, and a lot of the model behind their publishing process is like there's three things of you have your therapist, your cheerleader, and I am absolutely forgetting the third one, unfortunately.
Someone who's going to
like
write it for you, right?
yeah, you have like a support network.
Yeah.
So you absolutely want those things in your life, or in not in your in your life, yes, but also when you're writing.
Yeah.
Because it is a very, very emotional process when you're going through this, because you may dredge up things that you never would have thought would make you extremely vulnerable, extremely emotional. Sharing some things you could say with a friend, sure, but when you share it on a wider scale on paper, on a blog post, on the internet, it's there for anybody to see, and that level of vulnerability can affect someone really deeply.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I'm wondering, like, as you're sharing that, also, another question is, you're working often with LGBTQ folks and LGBTQ folks who are entrepreneurs, so super busy people. What kind of guidance, can you provide folks that are listening to this show right now about, okay, like, how can I bring more of myself into my business? What's the guidance around excavating content for stories that are relevant to you? Where do you encourage people to look to find those really transformative stories that sometimes they're so much a part of our lives that we can't see it because it's like we swim in it?
Honestly, I would think write down everything, even if it's, you don't have to like go verbatim line for line every single detail, but write even just like bullet points. Write down bullet points of some of the things that you may not even think are relevant, and think can you expand deeper on it? Can you go deeper? Is there a possibility for some story to be told or something to be gained from telling said story?
Yeah.
And the other thing I would also mention is tell it to somebody else, like somebody who will sit down and listen. And even like I said, with the bullet points, even if it's the most minor thing that you feel like may not have the most significant impact, someone else looking at it and hearing about it could pick up on it and say, hey, wait a minute, slow down. What about that? That seems really important. Well, can you talk more about that? And someone else can give you that perspective of, hey, this is really insightful or really inspiring to hear. I'd love to know more about that part of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like making that time, which might be where people resist of like, oh, wait, you're saying to write things down and write it all down, but I'm too busy. I have no time. So like, how do you model that yourself? I know that you're a writer. And so how do you, as you're serving your clients, you're doing all of that work to, keep the business running. And you also, need that creative energy to do your own thing. So what's a way that you set aside time to do that kind of writing yourself?
I honestly look back at my story a lot. And like for me personally, and telling my own story, my own writings, I think back a lot. Honestly, I journal quite a lot, and really try and recapture what was told. It's taken me a long time to even think that my story is even worth telling. Quite honestly, like it wasn't until, like Ashley, someone believed in me and believed in my story and believed in the power that it had, that I started to dig deeper, and I started to question, like, what about it makes them say that? What about them makes them believe in that? And that sort of led me on the path of just sort of believing in myself. And I have gone through and with multiple people and recounted a lot of things, and especially now since I'm recapping a lot of my story for an upcoming book, it's good to always go back with someone else, and it's always good to look back at my own experiences and what were the lessons, what were the takeaways that I had personally, and that helps keep me going.
Yes, I love that. That I wrote down, my story is worth telling. And I think that's something that maybe each of us, like if you're tuning into this podcast right now, keep listening, but look in the mirror and just let's say it, my story is worth telling. And it 100% is, because you don't know when you write it, who's going to pick it up, like you said, and will resonate with it and be like, I thought I was the only one who experienced this or felt this. And, that's how you build trust and build a following. So for sure, like if it's a creative work for the sake of being creative, amazing. If it's, adding your story as it relates to the business thing that you do or the idea that you have, it makes you more relatable. Like you're taking a step towards your audience to be like, hey, I'm a human. And here's some things that were challenging and yet formative to who I am. And I'm sharing this with you because you might resonate with it. And it's why I do what I do. Right. And so, like when you think about the folks that approach you, they're ghostwriting, they're running their own businesses, how do you communicate the value of, say someone wants to write a book about marketing and they're like, Brandi, I would love for you to be a ghostwriter. And you're like, great. One of the things that we want to do is get more of you in this story of why you want to write about marketing. Like, how do you coach someone who's a busy business owner to do more of that storytelling piece? Like, what are some of the benefits that you share with them about why that would matter?
I would definitely open up the conversation with probing questions about what about you has led you to this moment. And that's a crucial thing that I would tell people is you can write a book about any sort of advice. You could write a book on, let's say marketing, for instance. You could write a book about 50 amazing strategies about marketing. But if you don't provide why people should trust you, trust goes both ways. Insofar as people trusting me with, I feel like trust is really at the center of storytelling and also advice giving, especially books that are geared towards teaching people things, because you have to trust that the person is an expert in it. And one of the ways to do that is by the person telling their personal side. What are their experiences? Like for Ashley's book, Ashley has a lot of credentials that has led her to the moment of becoming the vice president of diversity of inclusion within 5 years. That's huge. And her telling her story and sharing her advice, that is why people trust her, because she was able to do that within 5 years. So that's why people will take her advice and take her advice seriously, and the lessons that are taught and told in her book, taking them to heart. So I definitely say you have to be vulnerable in any sort of book, anything that you want to write. There's a level of vulnerability that you have to give to the audience, so that way they know they can trust you, and that what you're going to say, they're going to take to heart.
Yeah, 100%. It's establishing that credibility, whether it's, your expertise that you bring to the work that you do, or why you've been impacted by the thing that you're doing, right? And the lived experience that you have. So really, really good advice there on just kind of, for anybody who's tuning in, kind of really thinking what's the story that I have to share, and should I share it? And I think the answer is yes. Consider sharing it, because we want to hear from you. We need your voice, right? So why, as being an out transgender person, why is it important for you to kind of lead with that in your business as you build it?
Why it's important to lead that I'm a transgender person?
Yeah.
Because there isn't that many transgender entrepreneurs, unfortunately. That's the long and short of it. Because so many business owners, and even the idea of a business owner, if you go and think about it in your head, if you ask anybody, hey, picture what you think of who a business owner is, most people will automatically tend to assume it's, a heterosexual cis person who runs, I don't know, let's say a marketing business or a consulting business or something like that. But trans people aren't at the front of it, and they're far, far from anywhere near the front. So I lead with that to not only show that, yes, trans entrepreneurs are here, we do exist, but also for other LGBTQ plus people, for other trans people who don't feel comfortable or don't feel that, let's say, a ghostwriter who doesn't know what the experience is like is going to be able to effectively tell their story or tell their story in the way they would want to. You know, it's, again, a level of trust that goes into it, of trusting somebody with their story, with their words, that that person is going to make sure their voice remains and what they say is what they would want to say. And it's hard when you don't know if the person is LGBTQ plus friendly or is an ally or is even LGBTQ plus themselves. So I put that out there. I know the experiences of being trans. I know the experiences of being queer, of being an LGBTQ plus person. And I share that vulnerability with other people, so that way there's a certain level of trust that's already pre-established.
Yes. Well, we're definitely on the same page about that. I think it's really, really important for those of us who are trans, LGBT broadly, and in particular trans folks. If you are running a business, share that if you feel safe enough. In many respects, we're serving as possibility models for younger folks trying to figure out, well, folks in general, trying to figure out how to be in the world of business. And, for those organizations that aren't quite yet ready or have created that sense of safety inside of a big workplace setting, this is an avenue, it's an option that not everybody wants to take. Though, if you have that fire in your belly, having more kind of possibility models out there is so key. So I asked that question just mostly, to thank you for doing what you're doing, but also to kind of remind folks of why this really matters, why visibility matters in particular. And, just on the note of what you're doing too, you're trying to get people to share their stories. And I think for LGBTQ folks, there might be a resistance of, say someone approaches you, there's a big book deal and we want you to work with this content editor, and you're trying to share stories about coming out or some very specific things that are central to being a part of the rainbow family. And if people don't get that, there's a lack of that cultural awareness or responsiveness to give you that kind of content editing that you need. Having your story questioned or trying to educate someone along the way can just add some additional resistance, or, some of us may feel exhausted of like, I have to explain myself again, so I just think it would be so refreshing to work with someone who shares an experience that you have. Definitely probably not the same, but someone who gets it, right? And sorry, you're going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it is exhausting. It is exhausting for a lot of people I know of, like for a lot of out trans people that choose to stay stealth. They don't want to have to constantly go through the thousands of questions that people have. And it's especially, like you said, when you're writing something about coming out or going through like a really dark period, and then just you're in that moment, you're focused on that moment, you're retelling everything, and then all of a sudden you're hit with the question of like, wait, so explain this part of your identity, and it just completely snaps you out of it. It takes away a lot of emotional energy to explain to somebody. It's exhausting.
Yeah, it's jarring too. I think we keep going back to this piece of trust, and sharing stories and trusting your story with someone else who earns the right to hear it, right? And it's, if you feel like someone's earned that right, and then something said about the story that makes you feel unsafe or feels like that trust is broken, it kind of, the creative process might take a while to start that up again, right? So there's real value in, obviously, like the skills that you're bringing to content editing, and also the lived experiences that you have leading with being out and trans, like that surely will attract other trans writers. I hope, to see more stories that are coming out soon. So like kind of on this note, why is being, an out trans person, why do you think that that's an asset to the business that you're building? How are you seeing that? Is there some kind of like confirmation that's coming in now because you are leading with being an out trans business owner, that you're seeing like a certain clientele that you're attracting? And I would imagine like the assumption would be, oh, all of the trans people who've ever wanted to write a book are coming to you. And I'm wondering if that's probably not the case. So who are the folks that find you, and are they attracted to working with you because you lead with that?
So I would say the folks that are attracted either are LGBTQ plus or have family members or people or are associated with other LGBTQ plus people. And I would say through referrals that people have made through different connections. And it's not I wouldn't say it's all LGBTQ plus people. I can't definitively confirm that. It's definitely not all trans people. All trans people aren't like flooding my emails, asking, finally feeling like they can share their story. But there's a very wide range of diverse people that are coming. And I feel like leading with being trans also leads with like I've mentioned before, a certain set of vulnerability of just like, okay, I'm able to share my experiences. It may not be LGBTQ plus. Like I know one of them is a person with a disability. So knowing that there's a sort of similar, I wouldn't say obviously not a similar set of experiences, but a certain level of, I guess, vulnerability insofar as they are willing to say that they are X person with X identity. And because I'm willing to say I'm out and trans and out and queer, that they have the ability to share whatever their diversity is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to ask you about visibility in general and like the power of stories. So and I'm seeing this more kind of on social media of some trans activists, non-binary activists saying, sharing your story actually hasn't done much for trans communities. It's made trans folks, like the visibility is higher, but it makes trans communities more vulnerable. And that's kind of the first time I've seen something like that that's disruptive. And it was actually kind of a growing thread. Yet, hearing from other trans, and this is kind of more kind of probably where I'm coming from, of like the stories that we're sharing, I've seen it myself with people who are not transgender really being able to connect, to be like, wow, you know what? I've never thought about what it would be like to be a trans person. And I'm growing my understanding, I'm building my empathy, and I'm willing to do what I can to use the privilege that I have to change the world. And so I'm wondering kind of what that brings up for you as someone who's sharing these stories with the world, in that thread of some folks feeling like, hey, this actually isn't moving the needle the way that we thought it would. So reactions.
I don't see that, honestly. Yeah. Like, it makes me question, like, if you think that's not moving the needle, you're free. Like, I open like any sort of open discussion about like the community and where things are going, but there's also like, okay, but you can't just say, well, that's not working, and then just leave it at that, because then it's like, where else do we go from there? Okay, so if you don't think this is working because of your own set of personal experiences or what you've seen or what you believe, then where else can we go? What could be better? What could we be doing more of? And I do think like that being out and sharing stories and sharing our stories in particular is important. It is important for people to know. And it is important for people to feel like they can be able to share their stories, like that they won't, be ignored or be looked over or be hated upon because they're sharing their stories. And like, the more people that speak out, the more people that share their stories, the more people who felt like they couldn't are going to be able to feel empowered and feel like they have a voice. Like, look at how things have gone from the past, I guess, 2 decades now, where we were in early 2000s to 2021 now. It's dramatically changed because of the work, not just from sharing stories and making ourselves more visible, but also because of the work of activists on the ground, making change, drawing attention to things and drawing attention to social problems. It's all a collective. It's a collective of efforts of the community to be more visible, to fight for the equality that we want. And to say like a piece of it isn't working, I Personally, I don't see it, but if that's the case, then where's the next best solution? That's where I'm at.
Yeah, yeah. It was surprising to me to see that, because I think like it definitely, like in referencing the past 20 years, where I saw the needle really move is as more kind of canvassing was happening and statewide, trying to get protections for gender identity at the state level. And Massachusetts is a great example. People talked about the work that they were doing called deep canvassing. And it was really trans folks as messengers going out into community and knocking on doors and talking with potential voters to say, hey, I'm trans. This is what this means to me. I'm your neighbor. Here's get to know a trans person,
Yeah.
and that was showing promise. And I think where the critique was coming was the past 4 years that we've lived through, and so much of our lives being turned into a political football because there's visibility on trans people are starting to gain a little bit of knowledge of who we are. And then the fears and the myths that were being spread by, people at the highest levels of government, and kind of some of the damage that did. And so I think that was coming out of, where I saw that was coming from academic professors, not so much folks on the ground and, like people really trying to change policy and laws. So I was kind of surprised to see that. And, I just was excited to talk with you about this because you are in the world, in the business of telling stories, of, just kind of seeing if you saw something like that and kind of in the social media that you consume.
Yeah, and I honestly think like if that's like if academia, but I know like encompassing all of that is kind of not a good thing to do. But if, that just only incentivizes to keep doing it, to do it more. Like,
yeah,
people create these false narratives and false assumptions because they don't know an LGBTQ plus person, a trans person, even like a diverse person.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of communities that are monosecular. I think monosecular is the correct term. They all are the same color. They're all the same sexuality. They're all the same, not all the same gender, but all male or female, or all cis, excuse me. And they never question it. And so when they hear these stories from other people who are blatant lies, they aren't going to know that they're lies.
Mm-hmm.
They're just going to take it for what it is because they've never met someone like that. So it just, to me, it's like it drives the need to keep telling more stories, to keep having more and more conversations about what it means to be trans. And I know I could see that a lot of people in, at least I guess, like cities and urban areas are like, we were kind of moving past that. And I've noticed that, but there are a lot of people that are still just like at the base level, don't know anything, never met a trans person. And there's still a lot more work to be done at that base level. I guess, like, we just need more of that to be done.
Yeah, well, it's why you do what you do.
Exactly.
And I completely agree. I think like proximity is everything, and that's, in the space that I'm in, of trying to have a greater appreciation of just the multicultural world that we live in, is like we have to break out of our comfort zones and the bubbles that we've created to really get curious about, our neighbors and people in our community. And I think like the extension of writing your story and sharing it is another form where, if people are isolated, especially in the world that we're in right now of pandemic land, having access to reading stories or consuming media of people that aren't exactly like you is really important. So you're adding to that. And thank you for entertaining that question. I think it's important.
And
I just wanted to get out ahead of that in case people are like, wait a second, I read this thing.
And there's one, like the one thing I want to add to that I just thought of, is just the very important thing of, it's not the job of trans people to educate cis people on what it means to be trans. Just for anybody that is now just tuned into this podcast and just tuned into this episode specifically and has never met a trans person, if you meet someone comes out to you, you meet a trans presenter, whatever the case may be, it is never their job to educate you about what it means to be trans. And that goes the same for anybody who is a diverse person. It's never the job of people of color to educate white people about what it means to be a person of color. It's never the job of, queer people to educate straight people about what it means to be queer. That is so crucial. And people who are willing to share that, that's fantastic. Not everybody is willing to share that. And not everybody is willing to sit down and educate you for, the thousands of questions that you may or may not have. Like, it's crucial to keep that in mind, because trans people are so often looked to tell their stories and share every little incriminating detail just to satisfy the curiosity of cis people. And that's not for everybody. A lot of trans people do it. A lot of trans people don't. And it's on the person to decide. It's on the trans person. It's on the queer person. It's on the diverse person to decide whether or not they want to take that time to educate.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, where it's self-education is huge. There's the magic of the Google machine. If you have a general question, start there. There's a lot of folks that do education where you can go into, if you're a lawyer and you want to learn more about trans issues as it impacts the law, there's tons of continuing legal education. Depending on your field, you can find this information to, talk to an expert and get that knowledge without picking up the phone and calling the one trans person who's your friend or kind of your friend in your life to be like, hey, I want to know all of these details about what it means, what your transition was like. And unless you've earned the trust and you've earned the right to hear that story, and someone who's trans in the context of this conversation has faith that you're gonna receive that story with care, that's a different conversation. But like, to randomly meet someone, and I think for most people who tune into the show, it extends to talking about your sexual orientation too. Nobody wants to, speak on behalf of all of the many, many different sub-communities under the rainbow umbrella, right? So I think it's good advice, in particular for the allies tuning in, or for cisgender folks who want to learn more. There's kind of like a scaffolding approach, like start with a Google machine, go to a formal training. If you're going at the speed of trust with a friendship with someone who's trans, go at the speed of trust and, follow the lead. But be careful of, where your curiosity takes you, because, your good intentions may have that kind of negative impact that's like, and we learn, there's, and that's the beauty of being human, is that sometimes we're going to make mistakes. So it's what we do to recover from that. But good reminder on that, Brandi. I appreciate that. Just kind of looking at the fact that we're almost done. And I feel like we just got started talking about your business, but I'm curious for you, knowing that you are very invested in kind of lifting up the next generation of LGBT entrepreneurs, what would be the advice, and kind of looking back at just getting started yourself, that you would share with someone who has a business idea, but they haven't yet taken that first step? There's still some kind of fear that they might be working through. What kind of guidance would you share with those particular folks?
I would say, number one, the first thing that comes to my head is network. Network with other entrepreneurs, network with other business leaders at networking events, at a Chamber of Commerce event. There are a lot of different networking opportunities that you may not even be aware of. You just have to dig deeper and to find business communities and get to know some of the people there, introduce yourself, say, hi, I'm thinking of this new idea for a business I might have. I'm looking for some advice, if it's good, if it's bad. And generally, from my experience, business owners will be happy to, offer their own input, offer their own advice, and to help you possibly take it from there, help you figure out where to go, what to do, what forms you need to fill out. I had no idea what legal documents I was required to fill out, what was needed, until I had Ashley mentor me and teach me all of this, because no one ever teaches you this. No one ever is gonna, there's no, at least from what I know, there is no like online college class or something like that, that is just like, okay, this is what you need to do. This is where you need to go. This is exactly what you need to do. A lot of that is peer-to-peer support. So networking is the number one. Number two, I would say, is definitely ask the supportive group around you. And if you don't have a supportive group around you, then network and try and find those peer support groups where you can ask, hey, is this a good idea? What do you think? What should I do? What, if you're selling something, if you're a marketing business, again, for example, what should I do? What do I need to do for social media? How do I run this? And ask for support from those peers and have some support in your life in general. It doesn't have to be business people. It can be people who cheer you on, because it can be scary starting out, wondering where you're going to be in the next 5 years, if it's something you really want to invest into. And it's going to be crucial to have people who have your back and say, you're doing fine. You're okay. You don't have to panic,
Yeah.
Everything is going well. Just keep going, doing what you're doing. And there may be times where you feel down. You're maybe thinking like, why am I doing this? Why am I in this? Is this really what I want to do? And that's the time where you have your support group who comes up to you and says, keep going. You're doing good. Don't stop just because it gets hard. It's hard at the beginning and it's hard throughout the journey. I will say that. But it is worth it. And if it isn't worth it, then you have to make the decision whether or not you want to continue doing it until you feel like it can be worth it. That's at the end of the day, it has to be worth it for you. If it's not worth it for you, then honestly, don't do it. Try something else. Try a new idea. If you want to get into it, if you feel like you have this idea that can change people's lives, then absolutely. Belief is something that's extremely important. You have to believe in yourself, and also having people believe in you is extremely helpful and helps you keep going, especially when times are tough, and even more so when things are going well.
Yes, 100%. I think the community piece that you eventually gain through that networking is a really important reminder. And, for those of us, tuning in who are LGBT entrepreneurs, you've got such great resources like the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, all of the different chapters across the country. There's Start Out. There's a number of ways that you can find other folks who are ready to be a champion or to show you the ropes, and answering some of those questions that you probably didn't learn even if you went to business school that focused on entrepreneurship, right? So find your peers and find folks that really believe in your belief in yourself, that they get it, or they're open to learning what you're up to. So Brandi, this is awesome. I would love to bring you back to the show at some point, but you definitely gave us a good starting place to think about content development, sharing stories, why it matters to our communities. So thank you for all the wisdom that you've offered. And, for everyone who's tuned into the show, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to connect with you and so many inspiring outbosses like Brandi, right? So we are going to continue coming at you every Tuesday morning. So keep tuning in and, consider, for yourself, how authentically do you want to show up at work in your life? That's what this show is about. And hopefully it's provided you some of that inspiration. So keep thinking about that, keep doing it, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you.